when my youngest, his biological father was alive, that was the first conversation that we had. It's like, hey, yeah, I'm moving in with your ex, and I'm going to be the male figure to your son in this house. We need to be friends.
This is Dadography, a podcast with stories and insights on fatherhood from dads around the globe, dedicated to providing you with the tools and tips to become a better dad. I'm your host, Corey Wolf. Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to another episode of the Dadography podcast, where we converse with fathers from literally around the globe in an effort to gain insight and tip on fatherhood that will allow us to expand our own personal journeys as fathers. Welcome to Dadography. And today we're going to be communicating and conversing with Jon Torrez. Jon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Corey. I appreciate your time and opportunity here.
Yeah, man. You said something just before we got on air here, and you were saying how there are a lot of platforms for moms to be able to glean from one another. Could you just kind of reiterate that for our listening guests?
Yeah, there's a significant corpus of content out there in book form and online forum for women that are becoming moms. They have a very strong knit community around that. But for fathers, it's that's something that's lacking, and that's what allowed me to just ease into this conversation because I think I've done a lot of things wrong and I've done a lot of things right. And I'd like to share at least the right things and laugh about the wrong things because we all learn,
Yeah,
right?
I hear you, man, for sure. Well, that's definitely what dadography is about. And with that being said, Jon, could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
43 year old living in Atlanta, Georgia. I have a prosperous job in technology, and my spouse has a prosperous job in the legal field.
Okay, nice. And kids?
Yes, two boys, 124 and 116.
Okay. Now, are you originally from Atlanta, or where are you originally from?
No, sir. I was actually born and raised in Lubbock, Texas. And
Okay,
spent some time in Austin, Texas. And then in 1999, headed to Atlanta for work and a relationship.
cool, man. Well, one of the things that I really like to do, Jon, is I like to try to feel around to see where an individual got their fatherhood technique or style from. And generally speaking, you can glean some insight from the type of fatherhood experience they went through with their dad. So take me back. What was your experience like as a kid with your dad?
So I really don't remember much. My biological father checked out when I was 4 years old. And I was number four of four kids. So all of my brothers and sister have all this amazing story and relationship with him, but I never had that. Where I got my fatherhood insight and guidance from was from my best friend's dad. His family dynamic was quite progressive. He had his biological father and his stepfather as best friends. So really, I had those two to provide a lot of guidance from.
Wow, that's incredible. It speaks a lot to really the role a father plays in society as a whole. Because if your biological father was gone, but you had a friend who had a dad and a stepdad, and you were able to, learn from them, I think it speaks volumes to what a father is.
Yeah, it really that family really believed in the concept of that it takes a village to raise a child.
Okay.
Uh, so that was kind of an impression that I've taken, from that, So my kids, my oldest son, when it was time to divorce his mother, he decided to stay with her, and when things went south with her, he decided to stay with my sister.
Mm.
So because all his friends were there and he was going to school there, so why move cross country and all that good stuff. So that wasn't a big deal. Everyone probably has like some negative connotation or some like, wow, what's happening there? And it's like, no, it's like at the time, everyone had a good relationship and everything was happy and it just
Right.
worked.
Well, if you had to describe your fatherhood style, how would you do that, John?
Uh, it's a hybrid between fixed structure and open range. As a toddler, you got to put in constraints, right?
Right.
And as a kid, ages 6 to 10, you got to put in a routine. And if you've done this well, self actualization really starts to kick in, and that's a psychological condition of being aware of yourself and the result of your actions in the environment and how it affects things and people. And if you've provided a framework and a structure for that developing mind, they're going to do that rather quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And my youngest hit this mark around 11.
Mm.
That's when the open range kicks in because they're free running at that point. They know how to stand up for themselves. They know how to be polite. They know how to ask questions. They know what no means, and they know what societal bad is out there, and they know what societal norms to adhere to. And that has been an incredible experience because that's where the different types of intellect start to form. There's 8 types of intellect,
Mm-hmm.
and you see the struggle of emotional intelligence with environmental awareness struggle. And this is where most kids have like these crazy outbursts, is because they don't know how to handle that, or to articulate what they're feeling, and they go primal and just like scream and start kicking. That's nothing wrong with the kid. It's just they need a little bit more nurturing. And then nurturing is where that structure and form is, to get them to the point where you have confidence in them running free.
Well, it seems like you're giving it a lot of thought, John. Like, I mean, I'm liking what you're explaining to me. Now, taking into account the experience that you had with um, your dad not being there after what 4 you said, right?
Hmm.
And then the father and stepfather of your friend, like how do you think, if at all, that plays a role or played a role in how you were fathering, or are fathering, I should say, your children?
It played a significant role because I know what it is to not have that pillar in my day to day. Right,
Mm-hmm.
as a child, you need that masculine presence
Mm-hmm.
because that's one of the guiding. That's one of the guardrails. So I was definitely aware of it being gone when I was home with my mother, and it was definitely present when I was hanging out at my friend's house. At either at his dad's house or his mom's house.
Right.
It was a dynamic that was consistent. It was different people, but they had already adhered to an agreement to nurture and raise the children this way together.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it was kind of funny because you got in trouble at one house, you got in trouble at both. And since my mom, was friends within that structure, the punishment was an extension. So if my friend had to come over because someone needed to watch us because we're in like fifth grade at this time, we not really left alone at that time anymore, and my mom would say, okay, well, your friend's in trouble, but y'all are hanging out. Y'all can hang out in the same room, but y'all can't watch TV. So it was like in school suspension sometimes, but we still got to hang out together. So that's where I feel that structure and nurture component is absolutely necessary because, if that agreement wasn't made, then, you probably hear it a lot today. Kids exploit that. It's like, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to go to mom's house and she'll let me do it or some nonsense like that.
Right.
No, no. If you openly communicate your intent and what you're trying to do, everyone agrees they want to raise their kids, with respect and etc. But doing it is hard in that way. But when my youngest, his biological father was alive, that was the first conversation that we had. It's like, hey, yeah, I'm moving in with your ex, and I'm going to be the male figure to your son in this house. We need to be friends.
Right. How did that play out in terms of just the end result of that conversation?
I thought it was good, honestly. You know, I thought we had a good, respectful relationship. I'm sure he had some animosity toward me, but you know, he didn't allow it to show.
How has that relationship with your 16-year-old, you're fathering, and but not his biological father, do you get from him vibes of "you're not my dad" ever at times, or how does that?
In the very early stages, and the presence that I established myself in when his biological dad passed proved to him that, you know, I'm more than just the guy with your mom. We had already started building, you know, a relationship. We would go to main event, play laser tag, and go to the movies and all that type of fun, kid fun stuff. So,
Right.
you know, we had a relationship. It's just every once in a while he would slip out and call me dad, but correct himself and be like, "Oh, I mean John. Sorry," you know. But after that, you know, I even changed my professional job to help him. You know, because up until that time, you know, his biological dad passed away in February, and by April, I'd already positioned myself to be at home more, because I was actually traveling the world for work, and I knew that I had to be here for to help him get through. And I feel that I did that. You know, he would have, you know, the emotional outbursts of loss and grief, you know, naturally, as we all do when we lose a parent. But as a kid, you know, you don't know how to control that, or you know, you get lost in it. You know,
Right.
so we were there for him in those regards.
Going back to your fatherhood style, I see where some of it is definitely predicated on, being present. How do fathers that are not present implement some of your strategies for fatherhood? Because you talked about even just the masculine presence. What do you suggest, or what are some of your thoughts?
This is the maturity of the relationship and the people in it, right?
Hmm.
When you're aware that the relationship between you and the mother is not going well, it's so easy to be bitter and angry and act a fool. But you got to be better than that. You got to think about the kid first, because those reaction and those emotions, you know, they may be sitting there blinking and looking up, but they're aware of how you feel. They see what's going on. They might not understand it, but they're aware of it, and that's where, you know, as a father, you got to be better than that. And you have to stop yourself. And if the mother's acting a fool, then you know you can't control that. You can only control yourself, and you got to get the situation past that, because, like I said earlier, everyone wants their kid to grow up and be good, right? That's universal.
Of
Um,
course.
but it's the management of the separation needs to be treated with respect. That's a really big ask of a lot of dudes.
So, what grade is your youngest in now?
He is a sophomore at Riverside Military Academy. And he is,
Military Academy.
yes, sir. He is a platoon sergeant responsible for multiple squads and developing leaders.
Wow. Now, before I get in a little bit more to how that decision was made, I guess I want to kind of jump to the end there and find out, like, do you think military school has positive effect on young boys? Because I've heard of it used as as a threat to young boys before. I'm going to send you to military school. I've heard it used as a pathway. Okay, well, if you're going to go to the military, this will kind of help, prep you. So I've heard it used a couple of different ways. But what are your thoughts?
Man, so when the youngest was in eighth grade, second semester, when the COVID lockdown started. In elementary school, he was an honor roll student, A's only, President's Club. He even got one of those form letters from the president saying congratulations on your academic achievements. He was an A and B student up until eighth grade second semester. And he was a B and C student in eighth grade second semester, is because he had to transition to remote learning.
Okay.
And remote learning, I don't know about you, but for me, the time between eighth grade second semester and first semester of freshman year, there's a lot of firsts that happen to a young man in there. A lot. That's a whole podcast conversation just in itself, right there.
Okay.
And he didn't experience any of it because he was locked in. COVID, pandemic, quarantine, all that good stuff. And as a blossoming young man, there's a lot of things going on. He didn't have an outlet. So when freshman year came in, he tried and it failed, and the frustration just kicked in, and he expressed, concern, and he didn't know how to deal with it. And as we were looking at a total wash of the freshman year, we were looking at summer school options and tutoring and all these things. And I'm like, what about military school? It's a closed environment. It's a structured learning. This is going to teach you discipline, more so than we can, because it's, literally 24/7 up your ass, march, sit, stand, etc. And he's like, is it in person? I'm like, yeah. He was all about it. We were filling out the form that night. Within a day or two, they called us back, and we went and toured the campus, just a parents tour. And, I wish I went to something like that, because that was an incredible experience to me. It was like a fancy summer camp. Have you ever been to a summer camp where you had the barracks to camp in, and then you did all sorts of activities outside,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you ate pretty much gruel? uh,
Yeah.
that's what it is, but with uniforms. And it teaches the original blue book of what an officer and an enlisted personnel is. So all of those core elements, when boot camp, you enlist in boot camp, they break you down and they build you back up. They do
Right.
exactly that.
Mm.
So there's like this 30-day process that he had to go into, to where he had to learn the contents of the book. He had to learn how to dress properly, make his bed properly, clean properly, all these basic things. Like, he already knew this stuff, but he didn't
Right.
know it to military standard. And he found comfort in that standard. And he excelled his second semester of freshman year to the point he recovered it. He recovered his entire freshman year. And that was astonishing. But that's the type of resources and capabilities that type of environment has 24/7. And, when he went in, he was a frustrated young boy.
Okay.
When he came back from the first semester, he was a budding young man, and we were blown away. So, I understand the threat of, we'll send you to military school because, regiment and expectations are hard to meet sometimes if you've never had that. But I actually see it as a result of, necessity. Some boys need that rigid structure as they transition into young adulthood. The second semester is near the end now, and he has maintained over 4.0 the entire year, and he has the highest level of rank he can achieve
Mm-hmm.
for that. And he is a young man now. I mean, he's
Yeah.
he's he's participating in physical activities called Raiders. He's in all advanced classes where he was expected to be, graduating into high school from eighth grade. And we couldn't ask for anything more. It's unbelievable.
Hey guys, this is Corey, host of the Dadography podcast. This episode is sponsored by and dedicated to you. Thanks for all your feedback and support. I mean that. However, if this is your first time tuning in, please be sure to subscribe And if you've done that already and you're getting some value from our interviews with dads from around the globe, please share. Teamwork makes the dream work. Now back to the show. That's good stuff. That's really good stuff. Let's converse a little bit about your oldest. What's the relationship like now? You kind of explained the distance at one time, and electing to be with his mom, and what's the relationship now? He's already a young man.
Yeah, he's just turned 24. Somehow the two have a birthday in the same week.
Wow.
So that there's some fun astrology numerology things for you. Um, the relationship has been different than I would say for most father son, especially for being the oldest, because he was with his mom in the beginning. He has a lot of animosity toward her for all of the choices that she made. And he was a little pissed off at me because I wasn't there. I was always a phone call away or a plane ticket away. But as he's gotten older in life, he's like, that wasn't enough. He's self-actualized enough and confident in his manhood to tell me that. And so we've had a beer and cried about it because that sucks. I didn't realize that he hurt that bad.
Right. With his comment though, right? Like, what do you think you would have done differently, or would you have done anything differently? I mean, because it's not the reality was that you and the mom were divorced. So
Yep.
now you said a plane flight away. So I'm gonna assume that either she moved somewhere else or you moved somewhere else. So,
I moved somewhere
uh,
else. Yeah.
okay, so you move somewhere else. So life goes on. You move
Mhm.
somewhere else, and then um, you were a plane flight away, or a phone call away.
Yep.
Would you have done anything different? I mean, just in light of his comment,
Yeah, I think I would. Hindsight's 2020, right? Uh, at the same time, I was so young as well that I don't think that I would have had the correct mentality, to have the same conversation that I'm having with you now about him.
Right.
Because when I was talking about depends upon the maturity of the relationship. Yeah, I should have managed that separation better.
Yeah.
I see that now, which is too. It doesn't comfort him. It doesn't comfort anyone. But it's like, oh man, that's a life lesson right there.
Do you think you would have stayed in the same state or city or wherever?
Couldn't have stayed in the same state. It was in Texas at the time, and Texas wasn't exactly the best place to work or be.
So then, with that on the table, right, you couldn't necessarily have stayed. What do you think you could have done different? With just trying to tap into the hindsight, right? Because you said you could have done maybe a few things different. I mean, like what would have been like more visits, more phone
Yeah, it would have
calls,
been way more visits. It would have definitely made my presence more felt. Established an essence of my physical presence.
right? Okay, got you. That makes sense. What are some of the fatherhood challenges I guess you faced with your young? I mean, I know we had the dip in grades with COVID. I tell you, man, that thing messed everything up, John.
It messed everything bad.
Wow. But what were some of the challenges that you faced with your youngest, and how did you overcome some of them?
Uh, so the biological father would had this way with language and words. He wasn't the lawyer, but he liked playing lawyer games with language,
Okay.
and he taught that to the youngest, and that was a little bit challenging to teach him, not to be condescending and not to be brash.
Hmm.
Because every young man wants to be like their dad. You see the dad working in the car, and the son's there with the flashlight, or the dad's the
Right.
engineer, and he's holding some schematics, and the son's holding the solder gun.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, it was that with words. Trying to convince him to use language differently than the way he was taught. That was a big thing. That was
Mm.
really challenging because anytime. that he spoke, it came across like a superiority complex, and it was a shallow one because he didn't know any better, but he knew how to speak that way. And getting that, fixed, that was a monstrous challenge because
Right.
we would work on it and work on it, and then he would go spend time at his dad's house, and he would come back from the weekend, and it would be back to ground one. It's like, oh, good gosh.
So that's probably the biggest challenge. And what do you think helped really overcome it over time? I mean, it definitely sounds like he's doing amazing now.
I think the military school squashed it out, honestly, because
Mm.
like 2 or 3 days before he was going for the first time, we saw it raw and in pure form again. Our hope was like the military school will be able to work and identify and get that out of him, and they did. Like when I say it's night and day, I'm not being boisterous. I'm not being paid by them. I'm literally saying from my honest heart that that institutionalization changed him for the better.
Your last comment there, it just resonates with me what you mentioned before about your friend, and they really had the concept of the village raising the child, and I mean
Yeah,
essentially the military school is a part
yeah, it's
of
that
your
village.
village. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. What are some things that you think that you would encourage our audience as it relates to fatherhood that you strongly believe you got right or you're getting right?
I would say don't set expectations for kids.
You mean like don't set expectations like I want my son to be an NFL star or
Right.
expectations? Okay,
Right. Or I
okay.
want him to read 10 books a year, or I want him to be able to run a mile in 15 minutes. Just if the kid wants to go try to run a mile,
Hmm.
let him. And if it takes 3 hours to do it, then it takes 3 hours, and say, all right, we did it.
You know, one of the things, John, as a result of my travels and kind of observing fatherhood globally, I think that's a very, very American approach to things. And it's interesting, but yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head because that probably flies right into the face of the majority of the Western or American
Yeah.
fatherhood approach. Like, okay, I want my son to be, the next Michael Jordan.
And that's not what raising a kid is. Right. We're supposed to, as parents, enable our kids to go further than we ever did. And you got to give them the tools to protect themselves, to make the right decisions for themselves and for their loved ones, and allow them to fail, and allow them to relish their success. And it's not your success, it's their success. So if you have these expectations, my son is going to be a politician or a lawyer, it's like, well, that's something that maybe you're projecting, maybe. you know a lot of people get this wrong, and I found myself doing this too, and I stopped it immediately. Is where the kid has like an interest. Wow, I'm really interested in this, and then you invest in that interest, and then it kind of just gets set to the side. Then you bring it back up, and you're like, well, what about this, what about that? Well, that's all it was an interest. Allow them to develop and embrace the interest until they get tired of it. And once they get tired of it, okay, what are you interested in today? Allow that curiosity to develop and complete naturally. Don't force it.
That speaks volumes, man. It really does. Well, John, listen, let's assume that 20 years from now, your sons are, scrambling around on the internet and they stumble up on an advertisement, who knows, whatever, right? A link, and it says Dadography podcast. They click it and it comes on, and lo and behold, they hear Jon Torrez today is on Dadography podcast, and they decide to take a listen. And this ends up being like a time capsule. If you had an opportunity to speak to them directly, um, now and put this in a time capsule for them, what would you like to say to them? I want to give you a few moments to just talk directly to them and say whatever you like, man.
I would hope that my boys in 20 years uh, remember the values that we put into them. Um, because what we're taught at home and what life teaches us conflict a lot. And the quality of life that you have depends on how true you are to yourself. And I hope they did all that. That's what I hope. Because we give them the necessary the knowledge to make decisions. We give them the necessarily knowledge to go gather information. My spouse and I, we're fans of the Bloom taxonomy learning model, and we instilled that in our kids. And I would hope that they remember all that and that they're still happy. That's what I hope for them.
Well, thank you very much, man. And guys, if you're listening, it's real clear that your dad loves you. John, hey man, tell me about this. You mentioned Bloom Texology. Help me
Uh,
with that.
Bloom's taxonomy, it's a method of learning, and it's how the public education in America used to work. And essentially, it's a 5 to 7 step process, depending upon the teacher or the version, to learn, absorb, and apply knowledge. Its most easiest to explain application is math. You learn the basic principles of what math is. You learn the basic principles of how to do math. And then you apply those principles in a problem. And let's say you can do all those things. Well, then you're presented with a final problem that has nothing to do with anything that you've talked about or did, but the knowledge that you've gained is applicable to this new problem. And if you can successfully apply that knowledge to this new problem, then you've completed the Bloom's taxonomy arc.
At present, I'm reading a book called The Five Pillars of Education.
Oh, yeah, it's
And
exactly. You're already on the right track. That's yep.
okay, yeah, so we're talking about symbols, patterns, order, categories, relationships.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And I'm actually the arguments for this method of learning are just really rock solid, and you can see them everywhere. So thanks, man, for sharing about that. I appreciate it for sure. Well, guys, this has been another episode of the Dadography podcast. We've had the pleasure of speaking with Jon Torrez today out of Atlanta, Georgia. John, listen, thank you so much for making the time and coming on to the show. We look forward to being able to get some feedback from people that are out there on the insights and tips that they've been able to get from you and having this conversation.
I hope it helps.
I'm sure it will, man. Thank you so much.
This conversation made me realize the village is not limited to friends and family. In John's case, the military academy became part of the village to help shape his youngest into the young man he is today. Expand your village whenever possible, but make sure they align with the morals and values you are trying to cultivate. Manage your separation and realize you only have control of yourself. Focus on the end goal and agree on a way to nurture and raise the kids. Find ways to make your presence felt, even if you are physically separated from the kids, and be open to correcting or apologizing for previous fatherhood shortcomings. Don't set expectations based on you projecting and trying to live your life vicariously through your kids. Provide the framework and the tools for them to go further than you ever did. The success is theirs. Thanks for taking time out, John. Appreciate the conversation, my brother. See you guys next week. We got another good one coming up. Trust me on that.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Dadography podcast. Thanks very much for listening. I would, however, like to invite you to be a part of the show.
Visit our website at dadography.net. Scroll down to the bottom of the page, click on the microphone, tell us your name, where you're from, and what fatherhood means to you. Remember, it takes more than DNA to be your dad.